Hi, welcome to the Photography Show Spring Shoots. I'm Angela Nicholson. I'm one of the founders of Camera Jabber, which is a website for photographers and videographers with reviews, news, tips and techniques. I'm also the founder of She Clicks, which is a community for female photographers. I'm going to be giving an introduction to Video Kit today, and I'm going to be talking about the general features that you might want to look out for rather than going into depth about the specs. I'm going to be talking about cameras, lenses, accessories, and also covering the software. I'm going to be talking about the nuts and bolts. I think it's about 2:20 today. Rick Bronx is going to be talking about the creative side and how to use it. Before I get going, I just want to say one of the best ways to get familiar with kits is to actually start using it. So if you have a camera, the chances are you can shoot video on that already, or you can use your phone. Don't let not having the ideal camera and the ideal kit stop you from shooting video, because as you start shooting, you become much more familiar and comfortable with the settings that you need to use, what you want to shoot, and it also gives you a better idea of the sort of stuff that you like to do and the sort of accessories that will be useful to you. So one of the first questions that we usually have to ask when somebody is thinking about buying a camera is, what do you want to use it for? And I know some people get a bit frustrated about that, but if you think, we have, say here, we've got the, this is the Canon EOS R5, and it's an incredible camera and it produces superb video. I mean, incredibly high quality 4K video and also even 8K video. But here we have the GoPro. And this is the Hero 9 Black, and there are times when you'd much prefer to use this. It's a much better choice in some instances. If I just switch cameras so you can have a look at it, firstly it's rugged. It's got a mount that can be used on all sorts of different accessories. So you can put it on your bicycle handlebars, you can mount it on your helmet if you're skiing, you take it snorkeling, you can strap it to the dog if he's running around, that sort of thing, and you get interesting, exciting footage. And provided the light's decent, you get really great results. It's got fantastic stabilization as well, so it's a really worthwhile camera. It's a good one to think about if you don't need absolutely the best image quality. Equally, if you want something that's going to give you really top-notch quality, then you need to step up a little bit. Now, another camera I like a lot, which is really good for getting started with video, is this is the Dji Osmo Pocket. There is now the Pocket 2. And as you can see, it's got a gimbal built in, and it's a really great little camera for just going out. I've shot loads of video on this, just going out for a day, having some fun, and it's a great way of getting started with video. It's not too serious, but it's got some advanced features, so you can take control over it, or you can keep it simple if you prefer. But you just start shooting, you have fun, you learn what you want to do, and you start developing your skills. Alternatively, if you want to move up a little bit from that, perhaps you could look at something like a compact camera. Now, compact cameras are great from the point of view as, you can slip them in your pocket or, in your bag. They're easy to use. You don't have to worry about changing lens. Everything's there. It's a nice, neat unit. And there are some compact cameras that are specifically aimed at people who are more interested in video than some others. So, for example, we have here, I've got the this is the Canon Powershot G7X Mark III, and it's got a really useful lens. It's a 24 to, or the equivalent of 24 to 100 millimeters, which is a really nice, versatile lens. It's also got a screen that tips right up, and you can therefore see it from above the camera. And that is really useful if you want to do vlogging at arm's length, because you can hold it out in front of you. You can do this sort of thing. And you can talk to camera. Top tip if you're doing that, of course, is look at the lens. Don't look at the screen, because it does look extremely strange. If the camera's a bit further away from you, you can get away with it. But when it's only at arm's length, it looks really obvious that you're looking above the lens. You need to look into it. So that's a really nice little camera. And then an alternative compact camera for video is Sony's ZV-1. And it's got a similar lens. It's a 24 to 70 equivalent. And it's a really nice little, as I said, you can slip it in your pocket. Great thing about this, it's got a vari-angle screen. So as well as being able to flip it in front like this so you can see what's going on, you can also angle it for sort of low-level shooting or high-level shooting. Neat feature also is under this little fuzzy windshield, is the microphone, the built-in microphone. Now, the fact that it's got this windshield is really useful. Sorry, can't do it left-handed. So that would slip in there, but it's also got a mic port. If I just switch cameras, it's got a mic port built in, as does the GX7. But one of the advantages here is this hot shoe. You can actually use that to mount. Say if you wanted to use a shotgun mic or something like that, you slip the mic in there. So that's quite handy. Alternatively, if you've got the G7X Mark III, you'd have to use a Lav mic. And I'm going to talk about mics a bit later on. So stepping up from a compact camera, you're talking about now interchangeable lens cameras. And really, there's a fundamental decision that you need to make when you're thinking about whether to go, when you're thinking about what interchangeable lens camera to go for. And that is whether to go for DSLR or mirrorless camera. Now, if you're starting from scratch, you don't have any sort of allegiance or system to build on, then you've got a blank page, really. You can do whatever you like. DSLRs have been around for a long time, and they will produce fantastic quality video. But really, their basis is, they started out for stills photography. They are about shooting stills. And one of the issues is, because they have that mirror, when you go into video mode, that has to lift up and you go into live view mode. And it uses a whole different set of technology and features compared to when you're shooting with the viewfinder. So suddenly things like the exposure can look different. You're using a different white balance system. You're using a different autofocus system, and that can make quite a significant difference. It also means when you look in the viewfinder, if you're in video mode, you won't see anything. You can't actually use the viewfinder when you're shooting video on a DSLR. Mirrorless cameras, however, they work in live view mode permanently. They don't have a mirror. So the image that you see in the viewfinder or on the screen is actually the image that you see from the sensor. Now, that has a couple of advantages. Firstly, there are no changes when you switch between using the viewfinder and the screen. There is no difference in the type of technology that you're using. So you get exactly the same seamless experience, really, swapping between the two. The other thing is that if you make a settings adjustment, you will see that setting reflected in what you see on the screen or on the viewfinder. And actually, although we're used to seeing people shoot video looking at the screen on the back of the camera, it can be really, really useful to use the viewfinder in exactly the same way as you do with stills. I mean, firstly, when you've got a camera against your face, it's a bit more stable. It's better stabilization. It's kind of locked in. It's easier to lock your arms in against yourself. So you get more stable footage. The other thing is, on a really bright day, it can be hard to see the screen. If you don't have like a little hood or something like that, it's hard to see the screen. And you're actually in exactly the same way with stills. You can look in the viewfinder and you'll get a much clearer view. You'll be able to assess exposure better, and you'll be able to see the colors more accurately and check focus. You can also zoom in on the screen and in the viewfinder, so you can see more details and check things. So you're probably picking up that I would, if you're brand agnostic, if you're starting out thinking about your first camera, and if video is really important to you, I would definitely go for a mirrorless camera, because they are the future. I think that DSLRs are still around, but mirrorless cameras are gaining traction in the market all the time, and all the development is going into them. So I would be inclined to go for a mirrorless camera. Once you've decided which route you're going down, you need to start thinking about sensor size. Now, sensor size is quite an important issue for several reasons. And it doesn't necessarily mean, oh, get the biggest because it's the best. It's about finding the right camera and fit for you. So one of the advantages of a smaller sensor is that the sensor is the most it's the most expensive part of a camera. And therefore, if you have a smaller sensor, the chances are the camera will be a little bit more affordable. But it does depend on the features that are associated with it. So don't assume, if you're buying a small sensor camera, that you're getting sort of fewer or lower level features, because there are cameras like Panasonic Lumix GH5, GH5S. They are really high-end video cameras that are used for all sorts of high-end videography, filming, and professionals use them and they absolutely love them. But they have a micro four thirds mount and a 4/3 sensor. So they're actually a smaller camera and a smaller sensor. And And things like smaller sensor cameras have an advantage for stabilization because there's more scope really to be able to move the sensor around inside the body without having to make the body huge. So cameras like the Olympus OMD EM5 Mark III have got superb stabilization. And I've actually shot being able to shoot footage walking upstairs and downstairs. And instead of it being completely nauseating, it's actually watchable. So, you know, it's worth thinking about those sorts of things. I'll cover focal length magnification a little bit later on, but it's worth knowing that the sensor size has an implication for how your lenses appear on your camera. Another thing to think about is that if the pixel count is the same, then buying a camera with a bigger sensor will probably enable better image quality because as you push the sensitivity or the ISO up, because say, provided the pixel count is the same, having a bigger sensor means you can have bigger pixels, which mean, or photo sites, which means they get a stronger signal from any light entering the camera, and that means less noise. And the thing about noise in video is that you see it in the shadows, and it moves. You know, it kind of twinkles almost. It's almost like glitter. You can see it, and it's more annoying in video, I think, than in a still. So it's actually more important. You often don't want to push the sensitivity up, the ISO up as high as you would with a still, in a video as you would with a still. So something to bear in mind. So if you think you're going to be shooting in lots of low light, then you might want to look at something like the Sony A7s Mark III. It's a full frame sensor, full frame camera, but it's only got 12 million pixels, which sounds really small by modern standards, but actually it means that you can get really good low light image quality. Dynamic range is another feature of larger sensors because again, it's to do with the amount of light that each pixel or photo site receives. Dynamic range is basically a measure of a camera's ability to record the range of tones in a single image. So if you have a narrow dynamic range, you might find that the highlights burn out really quickly. So, you know, you're looking at clouds, but there's no detail in them, they're just white. And similarly, at the other end, the shadows, there's no detail there, they just look a uniform black. But if you have a camera with a wide dynamic range, you'll be able to see more detail at those extreme ends, but also you'll see smooth transitions. So in the sky, the blue sky will transition nicely towards the brighter areas of the sun. You won't get banding or sudden cut off or anything like that. So you get more tonal range and more natural looking results. So that's sensor size. Another thing I've already mentioned actually with the compact cameras, tilting or vari-angle screens. Now, some cameras still have fixed screens, and there are ways around it. But the problem with using a fixed screen is that you're having to look down, and if you're shooting at, say, waist level, you either have to bend down, or if you're holding it, you're getting a foreshortened view. So it's really handy and more comfortable if your camera has got a tilting screen. If you think most but not all video is shot in landscape format, so just a tilting screen is fine for video. I personally like vari-angle screens because if you imagine, if you're going to be using it for stills as well, a vari-angle screen is much more useful when you're shooting in portrait orientation. If it's just tilting on the back of the camera, it's no help at all. But so this is of use for landscape and portrait orientation. So that's really nice. I mentioned a mic port, and say that's an important feature. Most cameras these days do seem to feature a mic port, but just check, make sure that the one you're looking at has, and I'll talk about the importance of microphones and connecting them later. Similarly, headphone ports. Fewer cameras have headphone ports, but some do, so again, it's worth checking. Log modes. Now, we increasingly get excited about log modes, and when a camera features a log mode, it's what it basically does. It's a bit like filming on a really grey, foggy day, because all the footage you get looks terrible. Essentially, you switch it on and all the colours are really muted. You've got everything kind of really low contrast. And the idea is it's giving you more scope for grading post-capture. So you can put the contrast where you want it. You have to grade the image or manipulate the image to put the contrast in, to put the saturation in, and it just gives you a bit more scope. That's quite an advanced thing to start doing, though. If you're looking at starting out with video, I wouldn't get too wound up unless you think you really want to get into creating your own mood and atmosphere in images. And often, you know, if you look at your camera, it probably has got things like film simulation modes, picture controls, picture styles, that sort of thing, which will enable you to give your images a particular, or your video, a particular look at the shooting point. And you can assess that on the screen or in the viewfinder, so you know what you're getting from the outset. And it is easier to assess what you're getting if you're shooting in one of those more standard modes than if you're using a log mode. You need a bit of experience, even though there are preview modes that can help. Similarly, we're now starting to see more raw video capability in cameras. And this is a bit like, if you imagine a normal video is like having a series of JPEGs. And so you've got some control, but not a huge amount. If you're shooting raw files, which are together in a video, you have much more scope to make post-capture adjustments. Obviously, they're a lot, they take up a lot more space on the memory card. So that means in most cases, but not all, you might actually need an external recorder connected by HDMI to enable you to shoot raw video, but not all. Actually, you know, some cameras do, like the R5, do shoot internal raw video with the right memory card. If you're getting into thinking about raw video, then the chances are you need to buy an external recorder, as I say, and that's something like an Atomos Ninja 5. There are other external recorders, but that seems to be the go-to one at the moment. It's also got a screen on it, which is, I think it's 5 inches across, so it's bigger than the normal screens, and it gives you all sorts of extra control. You put an SSD into it, a storage device, and that enables you to store your video as you shoot it when the camera is connected by an HDMI cable. So, as I say though, quite an advanced feature. So I'm going to just touch quickly on lenses. And the thing about if you want to do arm's length video, not everybody does, I know, but if you want to do the traditional, as people think about it, vlogging with the camera at arm's length, like this, you want a lens which is maybe equivalent of about 24mm, something like that, because that will, if you have anything much longer than that, your face will be quite big in the screen, because obviously your arm is only so long and your face gets quite big in the screen. If you get anything wider than that, I mean, the 24 gets you some background, but if you get any wider than that, you start to look quite distorted and it's not the most flattering look. So I wouldn't go too much wider than that. 24, if you've got really long arms, you might get away with 35, but 24 is usually about the sweet spot. To get 24mm equivalent on an APS-C format sensor, you need to be looking at a 16mm lens. And there are plenty of those around, plenty of zoom lenses that go that wide, or you can get a fixed focal length. If you're looking at a micro four thirds camera, then you'll be talking about 12mm to get that effective focal length. And this is because, as I mentioned earlier, the focal length magnification factor. Again, thinking about lenses, not everybody's going to be shooting with stuff at arm's length. You know, you might want to be going out and shooting all sorts of things. And basically think about the lenses in the same way as you would with stills. So you might want a nice range of focal length so you can, you know, capture distant details. You might want a macro to get close-ups, that kind of thing. Something like a wide zoom range, maybe, you know, 18 to 200 or 16 to 100 or something like that, could be really a good lens, because it means you don't have to keep swapping. You've got lots of scope to zoom to get the composition that you want without having to take the lens off all the time and swap it around. Also, a fixed aperture is really handy with a zoom lens, and also a wide aperture is really nice, either with a prime or with a zoom lens. I say fixed, I actually meant constant. So the thing is, the constant aperture, when you zoom, the exposure won't change. If the aperture changes as you zoom, you'll see the exposure change, and that will affect your video. So ideally, get nice wide apertures and get constant apertures if you're going for a zoom lens. And also, the autofocus needs to be nice and quiet. It's the motors in the lenses that create that zzz, zzz sound that you hear when it's focusing. So if you know that your lens is particularly noisy when you're shooting stills, then it's not going to be an ideal video lens. You could use it in manual focus mode, of course, but it does limit what you can do. Because one of the things about mirrorless cameras is that their autofocus systems have come on leaps and bounds, and these days They're incredibly advanced. You can have all sorts of tracking modes that work really well. We're starting to see more IAF become available in video, which is really, really useful because it means that your subject, if you're shooting people, will be sharp without you having to sort of really keep an eye on things. Alternatively, there are other modes you can use and they will enable you to keep your subject nice and sharp. But what you don't want is to hear the lens going zzz, zzz, zzz all the time. Okay, so let's now think about accessories. One of the first things you're going to have to buy is a memory card. Now, most cameras these days use SD cards. Some use CF Express is becoming popular. I'll just show you one of those. So this is a CFX, or these are two CF Express cards. I'm struggling to say that today. So they're a little bit bigger than SD cards, and they will go, but you need to check your camera. So the R5, for example, takes those, but most cameras take SD cards. You'd be familiar with this sort of thing. Now, it's worth checking in the manual of your camera what compliance or what sort of speed the card slot is, because increasingly we're seeing UHS-2 card slots, and that enables faster file transfer, which is important for video and burst depth. And so you might want to get a UHS-2 card. And if your camera does have a UHS-2 card slot, I would encourage you to get a UHS-2 card. If you're not sure what your card is, if you have a look on the back, you see here, this one's UHS-1, it's got one set of slots, contacts, and this has got 2 rows of contacts, it's UHS-2. So that's a really nice, easy way of telling what sort of card you've got. After you've got your card, you've got your camera, you've got your lens, the most important accessory you can buy for video is a microphone. You could produce the best video in the world, but if you put it on YouTube with bad audio, you will get crucified. It's a really good way of getting nasty comments. So don't do it. I understand it's really, really tempting to use the onboard mic. And as I test cameras, I often use the onboard mic just to show what they can do or can't do. And if you're in a situation like this, which is relatively, it's got some soft, it's got audio panels in it, it's got soft furnishings or whatever, inside, and you're not touching the camera, you might get really good results from your onboard mic. But any situation outside of that, if you're at a slightest breeze, if you're handling the camera, if the person who's speaking to the camera is a little bit too far away, you will get terrible results. And it's a really good way of annoying a lot of people. So use an external mic, and there are lots of great mics around. The simplest is to use a Lav Mic, and that's just your simple clip mic that you clip onto your jumper and you connect it to the mic ports on your camera, and you've got a small cable. You can get them up to, they might be 5 meters long or something like that, so you can stand some way. Really nice and simple. Alternatively, you could go for something like this, which is a shotgun mic. And this just slots into the hot shoe. It doesn't connect to the camera via the hot shoe. You actually use this cable. And this one's quite unusual because the cable connects to the front of the mic. And then you just pop that into the hot shoe and it sits on top. We call that a shotgun mic. And it will be fine for picking up ambient sounds. It will, you could talk to it. Ideally, if you're going to be talking into it, you want to be within a meter away. I mean, they usually say with these things 18 inches is ideal, but try not to get much further than a meter away, maybe arm's length, something like that, to get really good sound. Also bear in mind that noise can be an issue. Sorry, not noise, wind can be an issue, wind noise. And usually they come with something like this, a windshield, and you just stretch that over it and that will keep some of the wind at bay. If you're filming outdoors and you've got the leaves sort of wafting in the breeze in the background, you probably want a little bit of wind noise getting in, but what you don't want is that horrible roaring sound which just destroys any other sound. So something like this will deal with most of it. But one way to monitor it and what's going on is to use some headphones. So if you can connect headphones to your camera, so much the better, because you'll be able to keep an eye on what's going on. I don't particularly like wearing these all the time. I sometimes just do a quick check and then take them off and then off you go. I'm certainly not very good at listening to them while I'm talking to the camera. but they're a really useful thing. If your camera can't accept, doesn't have a headphone port, some mics have one, or you might find there's an adapter that enables you to connect it. But you can you can use the audio level meter on the back of the camera that should give you an idea what's going on. But headphones just make it that bit easier to assess what's going on. Alternatively, there are things like these, the Wireless Go. This is the Wireless Go 2, which is a wireless system. You connect that one to the camera via a cable, you put it in the hot shoe, and then you clip this one onto your jumper or whatever, and it's got a microphone built in. And with the original Wireless Go, you can be 70 meters away. With the Wireless Go 2, 200 meters, and as long as you've got line of sight, and you'll get good audio. Really neat little unit that means you don't have to worry about cables. 200 meters is much further away from my camera than I like to get, so that's plenty. Okay, another accessory that's really useful, pretty important, is a neutral density filter. Now, you might have heard of these before. A neutral density filter is basically a filter that takes out some of the light that is getting through the lens into the camera. They're very popular in stills photography for allowing us to record movement in water and that kind of thing. But they're almost essential, really, for video, because usually you want to use a shutter speed that's about twice the frame rate. So if you're shooting at 25 frames a second, you want to be using a shutter speed of a 50th of a second. And if it's bright light, or you want to shoot at 2.8 or something like that, you'll really struggle to get the shutter speed down that low. And that's where a neutral density filter comes in. If I just put that on there, you can see, and this is a variable neutral density filter. So if I rotate it, it's got darker, and the other way should get lighter. So that's a really handy feature, and it means that you can pop this on your camera, on your lens, and you just adjust it to get the amount of filtration that you need. Top tip, have a look at all your lenses and see what filter mount they use. Find the biggest one. If you're thinking about buying another lens, or you might upgrade, have a look and check what filter mount it uses, what size, because it's better to buy this in a big size, because these are quite expensive, and then buy some step-up rings, because step-up rings cost about £3, maybe £5 at the most. And then, so you could buy lots of step-up rings, but just one filter, and you swap it between all your different cameras. Okay, so that's, I should say H&Y Revo ring. They've got a really neat feature, a really neat unit, which is called, say, the Revo ring, which is like an adjustable step-up ring, and an adjustable. They even have one that's got an adjustable step-up ring with an adjustable or variable neutral density filter. Taking a little while to come to the market, but worth looking at. Tripods. Now, if you've got a camera, a tripod that you use for stills, you might be able to get away with using that. But as soon as you start wanting to introduce movement with your camera, you'll come unstuck, and really you want a fluid head. So I've got one here. I just pull this in. And the thing about this is it just allows you to make nice smooth movements, and you can even do things like, depends on the balance. This is quite well balanced at the moment, but you can see the camera is just tilting, so it will just make life a little bit easier. Oh, and another accessory that's quite popular these days is a gimbal. Now, hang on. So basically, a gimbal is something that's got 3 motors in, and it stabilizes your camera. And I mentioned some cameras have got great stabilization built in, but others, you know, they might be good if you're just standing still, but as soon as you start walking, you get lots of motion. And something like this can really help. Now, this is a Zhun Crane 2S, and it's a really strong set of motors. It works really well, but it weighs about 1.8 kilograms, I think, off the top of my head. So if you add a camera and lens on top of that, you really start to notice it. I mean, I've used this quite extensively over long distances, and you do build up some muscles. But equally, if you've got a smaller, lighter camera, then you can, oops, you can get away with a smaller, lighter gimbal. So this is the Zhiyun Weeble S, and as you can see, it's quite a bit smaller. It's about half the weight of the other one. And it's, you know, I've used a full frame camera like the Sony A7s Mark Iii on here. I've used the Nikon Z7 II on here, and you know, it does a really good job of stabilizing the footage. So you get much more watchable footage, and you can make smooth movements, which is really nice, very handy. Sometimes a light could be useful. The light's got a bit lower in here since I started talking. I'm actually illuminated by two rotor lights, Neo 2s, one of these. And this is a really useful little unit because you can use that to adjust the brightness, that to adjust the white balance. And one of the things about having a light in video, say if you're going to do, you've just got some still, just turn that down. You've got something that's still that you're filming. If you just move the light, you can create a more interesting video. You don't always have to move your subject or move your camera. You can just move the light. So that's a useful little addition. So it's not just about getting enough light onto your subject. It can be about creating something interesting. Finally, a quick word on software, because I do want to let you ask some questions. Things like Adobe Premiere Elements is a great starting point. You have to pay for it. I can't remember how much it is. I think it's about £125, but it actually teaches you how to edit, because initially, you know, when you start editing video, it's a bit like when you start editing stills for the first time. It's like, oh, what are all these controls? What do I have to do? And you have to think through the process. Whereas an Adobe Premiere Elements takes you through all the steps, and as you learn, as you sort of get more confident, because the way it does it, it takes you to the area where you need to be. So rather than having to think, right, I want to do this, click that tutorial to take you to it, you just go straight to the end point and start working on it. Imovie is also very good, and if you're using an Apple computer, a Mac, that comes free, so I'd encourage you to use that. Personally, I use Final Cut Pro, which is an Apple product, which is like the step up for iMovie, and that is really good. Adobe Premiere, also another one I've used in the past, excellent. But Blackmagic offers DaVinci Resolve, which is a really high-end piece of software, and it's actually free. So if you're not sure, have a look at it, download it and have a look at it. It's quite complex, so it might not be the right one to start with, but it could be something you move on to. Maybe start with iMovie or Premiere Elements to get the basics under your belt, and then move on to Blackmagic, design DaVinci Resolve. Final word, Cinema Grade. I've been using that recently, and that's a really useful plugin for Final Cut, Premiere and DaVinci Resolve. That is great for grading video footage, getting the colors right. Basically enables you to, it speeds up the whole process. It enables you to identify clips that should look the same, and therefore apply the same kind of adjustments to them. So if you shot something outside and something outside, sorry, something inside, something outside, you can select all the shots that are outside and adjust one, and then apply that adjustment to all the others. And similarly with the ones that were inside, you adjust one and apply the adjustment to all the others. So it really speeds up the process, works very well, you can make some automatic adjustments, and it enables you to apply some interesting effects as well. So I'm just going to check now to see if we've got any questions. Try and get my mouse working. There we go. Michael Owen says, I haven't mentioned camcorders. No, I haven't. And there are fewer of them. I was really wanting to focus on the sort of larger sensor, interchangeable lens cameras. You don't see as many camcorders being announced these days. So yes, I think they are a little bit a thing of the past. Someone's asking for a recommendation for a camera for close-up product videos. Really, that's a feature of the lens. If you want close-ups, then you probably need to get a macro lens. So, you know, if you're doing a close-up product video, you could probably put your camera on a tripod, so it's nice and steady, and then so you need a macro lens, I would suggest. So it really depends what you're going to do. Or you could, you know, if you want to do a compact camera, go for a compact camera. Then I know, for example, the ZV-1 is pretty good for that kind of thing. And that one's actually got, it's slightly different, but say if you're doing some vlogging and you want to hold up a product, it's got a product shot mode that will actually tell the camera to stop focusing on your eyes and focus on the product instead, which is a really neat feature. Patrick's asking, which should I use on a regular basis, 25 frames a second or 50 frames a second? Varying opinions. Yes, there are. I mean, I tend to go for the lower frame rate, but there are times when it's easier to go for 50 because it's easier to get the right shutter speed. I think Rick will probably cover that later. Right, Philippa says, which type of mic would you recommend for nature sounds rather than human voices? Actually, the shotgun mics are pretty good, but something like the Rode Wireless Go could be really good, because actually, say if you're videoing birds, you could actually pop the transmitter on which is the bit with the mic built in, you could pop that on the bird table or wherever the birds tend to come. And then you can go back and say, as long as you're within 70 meters for the original Wireless Go or 200 meters line of sight with the Wireless Go 2, you will get the sound of the birds landing on the bird table or whatever being transmitted back to your camera and recording as your video. So something like that. Equally, you can, with the clip-on mics, you could clip it on. I've got a little dog. I could clip it on my dog and he'd be running around and I get the sound of him running rather than just the sound of him when he gets back to me. See if we've got any more questions. So David said, why are shotgun mics put on the camera when it's often too far from the subject? It makes no sense to me unless you have that 25mm close-up shot. Yes, I mean, that's why I said it actually, shotgun mics, really, if you're using them, you need to be kind of arm's length. And it is odd because when people use a shotgun mic in the studio, they usually only have it about 18 inches away from their mouths. Maybe just out of shot somewhere like this. The closer you can get it, the better the sound. So it doesn't really make sense. You're quite right. And I would be more inclined to use a Lav Mic or one of these Wireless Go mics. Incidentally, the Wireless Go's, you can actually connect a Lav Mic to them as well, so you don't have to have the block visible. Saw a question about a gimbal. Oh, Graham, the larger gimbal I mentioned is a Zhun, which is spelt with a Z, Zhun Crane 2S. Really solid piece of kit, works very well. As with all gimbals, you have to set them up so that the camera's well balanced. First time you do that, it seems like quite a faff, but you get better at it the more you do it. And every time, the key is to set your camera up as you will use it. So if you have the screen flipped up when you're filming, flip it up when you're balancing. If zoom, put the right lens on, zoom to the right point, make sure you've got the filters on, that kind of thing, because you've got to get the balance as you'll use the camera. Someone's asked for best camera for video and photography. Well, there's lots at the moment. I mean, you could say, you could just say, oh, right, okay, that's the Sony A1 because it's a really good all-rounder, or the R5, the Canon EOS R5, but they're very expensive cameras as well. Just step down a bit, you might want to go for the Sony A7 Mark Iii. And it does depend what you're shooting, because if you've got fast moving subjects, then the R5 and the R6 are really good because their video is excellent. Sorry, their autofocus is excellent. Sony's autofocus is excellent. But if you're not worrying about tracking moving subjects, then suddenly, you're freed up to use all sorts of cameras. So it really depends. But off the top of my head, I would say something like, the Sony A7 Mark III is a really good all-rounder. Jennifer's asked, do I use a slider? I have done on occasion, and they are really useful little devices, but I think a lot of people have stopped using sliders because they've gone over to using a gimbal. But actually, if you use a gimbal and you want to do a nice smooth movement, you end up doing it half a dozen times just to make sure you've got it. And did you keep it level and all of this sort of stuff? And did you move at the same pace? Whereas with a slider, you've got a nice steady movement. And you don't really need a massive slider. I think I've got one I was testing one recently. I think it's only about 20 centimeters of travel, but that can be enough just to introduce a little bit of movement and interest into your footage. Okay, so oh, someone was just asking what the plugin is. That's Cinema Grade. Just type Cinema Grade into Google and you should find something. Anyway, I hope you found that useful. A really quick introduction to Video Kit, and it's been great trying to answer your questions. So I hope you enjoy the rest of the photography show. Bye-bye.